Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is Dorie Clark, and we're here with our weekly Newsweek interview show, Better, where we interview authors, thinkers, executives, and in this case, Professor Jeffrey Pfeffer of the Stanford Graduate School of Business. He is the author of a new book, which is called 7 Rules of Power. The subtitle is Surprising but True Advice on How to Get Things Done and Advance Your Career. Jeff, it's so great to have you here.
Well, it's nice to be with you and to see you again.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure. And your writings on power actually are some of my favorites. I loved the new book, and your previous book, Power: Why Some People Have It and Others Don't, is one of my all-time favorites. And this was right up there, adding to the canon. So I'm so excited to talk with you. And for those of you who are tuning in live, please type into the chat box and let us know who you are and where you're dialing in from. We'd love to say hello to you and take your questions for Professor Jeffrey Pfeffer. So, Jeff, the first question that I have for you, one of the areas, power is, of course, a kind of loaded topic in our society. But one of the things that comes up with probably the most frequency with regard to discussions about power is the role of authenticity and power. And you have some countercultural thoughts about this. I'd love to hear how you feel that authenticity and power relate or don't relate.
Yeah. Well, thank you for asking that question. So you need to be clear that these thoughts are not just my thoughts, they're other people's thoughts as well. Adam Grant, the very big best-selling author, some years ago wrote a New York Times column entitled, "Unless You're Oprah, Be Yourself is Terrible Advice." And he talks about the author A.J. Jacobs, who decided to be a real life version of the Jim Carrey movie Liar Liar, and to tell the truth to everybody that he saw for 2 or 3 weeks, which, by the way, did not work out very well. He told his nanny he wanted to date her. He told his editor that if his wife left him, he would want to sleep with her. He told his in-laws that their conversations were boring. Essentially, he concluded that at the end, that with too much truth, marriages would crumble, careers would go into the toilet, etc. And I think that's right. I think Herminia Ibarra has a wonderful, which I'm sure you've seen, video on YouTube. She has an article in HBR also about authenticity, where the article in HBR begins with a youngish woman gets promoted into a position. And I think this is more common for women than for men, but it's common for everybody, has this moment of kind of imposter syndrome. I don't really belong here. I'm not sure I'm ready for this position. And she shares that with her team. I'm going to be authentic. I'm going to tell you, I'm not sure I'm qualified for this job, which turns out, of course, to have been an enormous career disaster, because people don't want to hear that they're being led by somebody who doesn't know what the hell they're doing. So, I think you do not need to be authentic to yourself, which in my opinion is much too egocentric and much too self-referential. I think you have to be authentic to what the people from you want and need. So I know Dorie pretty well. My suspicion of Dorie is that when she puts on her show Better, there may be a day you don't feel good. There may be a day that you've had a personal problem. There may be a day where, your pet is sick, or there's been some setback in your life. But when you show up to do this show, you understand that you have listeners and guests who want you to show up in a positive, energetic, committed, engaged way. And so you are not necessarily true to, oh my God, I'm in a bad mood or whatever. You are true to what the people who watch this show want and need from you.
I think that's right on. And I definitely agree with your perspective on this, Jeff. Now, just to clarify, because I feel like some people get a little confused, or maybe what they're reacting to is something different. What you are not saying is, oh, gay people go back in the closet because, people don't really like hearing about that. You actually have a very different message about, what authenticity is and isn't. Correct? Can you just sort of parse that?
Yeah, no, I think you need to show up with the parts of yourself that people want and need from you at that moment. So if they need you to be confident, you need to act confident, even if you don't feel confident. if they need you to show up in a powerful fashion, even if you don't feel particularly powerful, you need to show up with power. If as my friend Gary Loveman said, when he was running Caesars, I would show up to a place in the middle of the night, and I would be tired, but the employees who I would meet as I would walk into that casino hotel, they may see me only once a year, and they want to know that the person who's leading them is engaged, cares, has energy. And so you have to, I think one of the great skills of leaders is the ability to act. You have to be able to act. You have to act like a leader, even if you don't necessarily feel like it.
So true. We're here with Jeffrey Pfeffer. He is a professor at the Stanford Graduate School of Business. His new book is called 7 Rules of Power. And if you want to learn more about Jeff and his work, just go to jeffreypfeffer.com. And I want to say hi to some of the great folks tuning in to join us from around the world. We have Karen from Boston. We have Muzgan joining us. Carolyn is here from Michigan. Christy from Oakville, Ontario. Nisha is in Hopkinton, Mass. That's right. The start of the Boston Marathon. Alexandra is in Gdansk. I think that's in Poland. Cheryl is here from Minneapolis. We have a LinkedIn friend from California. Anurag is in Joburg. Melanie is in Raleigh-Durham. Muzgan is from Iran. Alexander is from Maine. Samia is from Oman. We have a LinkedIn friend from Vancouver, and many more. We love having all of you type your questions in for Jeffrey Pfeffer. And Jeff, a question that I'm curious about. You have written multiple books about power now. We have Power, Why Some People Have It and Others Don't. We have the newest book, 7 Rules of Power. We have your other one, which is, I believe, managing with power.
Correct.
So you have really parsed this topic. I am curious, as you were writing the newest book, 7 Rules of Power, what was animating you? What hadn't you said about power, or that you felt like needed to be said? Or what is it that people just still weren't getting that made you want to write another book and say, here, people, this is what you need to know?
That's a great question. So I think, first of all, if you were to go back to my first book, which is called Power in Organizations, and then Managing with Power, and then Power, Why Some People Have It and Others Don't, and now 7 Rules of Power, you would find one clear trend. The reading level has gone down. The books have gotten shorter. So as one of my editors said, you're chasing the market. Hopefully you're catching it. I think people, as you know, Dorie, as an author yourself, what you could do 20 or 30 years ago, you cannot do today and expect a human being to read it. I think that's number one. I think number two, as I have taught this material, and it has been 12 years since the last book on power came out, I have learned, I hope, I don't know, but I've learned through teaching this both online, through Stanford's LEAD program, and then on campus in my MBA teaching, I've learned what the students are concerned about. I've learned how to frame things differently and hopefully more effectively. And so I decided I wanted to try to take what I've learned about conveying this material and put it in a new book. That's number one. Number two, I hear this story all the time, which I'm sure you hear also. Everything's different. The internet has changed everything. The new generation is different. Everything is different. And so I wanted to begin this book with a chapter or two on why, in fact, everything is still the same. You may not want it to be the same. I have a friend who I met recently when I did a program in Spain who said to me, he said, I become dean of a Filipino business school. And I said, well, then you understand that nothing has changed. The new president of the Philippines, by the way, duly elected, Ferdinand Marcos Jr., the son of the president, the Kingmaker. If you haven't seen it, what a magnificent documentary on Imelda Marcos, who at 90 years old has more power than most of us will ever have. And the documentary is done. It shows her getting ready to put her son back into the presidency. It's just amazing. So the world actually has not changed very much. And the principles of power are still there. And I wanted people to understand that, and to understand that if you look around, even though my friend Henry Timms co-authored a book called New Power, which talks about, in quotes, democratization, the data show, let alone the United States, but around the world, democracy is actually in retreat, that freedom is in retreat. And with the rise of strong leaders, oftentimes, frankly, strong men, we need, if we're going to live in a better world, we need to understand the forces that are creating the world that we're in, because you can't fight. You can't really change the world if you don't understand how it operates.
Yes, I think that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. We're here with Jeffrey Pfeffer. He is the author of the new book, 7 Rules of Power. And this is Dorie Clark. This is our weekly Newsweek interview show, Better. And Jeff, you have some ringers. You have some fans in the house. Marion says, former student of Professor Pfeffer, and Asamanya just finished your power course. So you're making an impact far and wide here.
Well, I hope so. You know, as I try to tell people, I've taught a lot of people, but and unfortunately, I don't have them sign a disclaimer that says, you know, I'm not responsible if they for what they do, how they use the material. I only try to teach them, and then they're responsible for using it in the best way possible.
That's right. That's right. Let's hope we do it. So a great question came in, Jeff, from Trisha, and she wants to know, when you think about defining power, who are some of the leaders who've shaped the way that you think about it and have pushed you to think differently about power?
So I define power as the ability to get things done against opposition. You know, so in the world, different people have different points of view. They oftentimes have different key performance indicators. They often are exposed to different information. So if you're an engineer, you're going to think about the world differently than in your finance, or if you're in marketing, or, you know, I mean, so different people have different educational backgrounds, and so they see the world differently. And so then the question becomes, who gets to decide, you know, in these joint decisions, who gets to have the most influence? And you see this in interpersonal relationships. When my wife, who's now deceased, Kathleen, was alive, she and I had very different tastes in movies. And so the question is, whose taste would prevail for deciding which movie to watch on a Saturday night? And the answer, of course, was mostly hers. But in any event, so power is the ability to get things done in situations in which people have disagreements about maybe what to do and how to do it. So I think that would be that. I have learned a lot about power by reading books that I don't think many people would necessarily read or recommend. Obviously, Robert Caro's books about Lyndon Johnson, Robert Caro's book, The Path to Power, about Robert Moses, who basically created New York City and state as we see it. A book entitled How to Be a Dictator, which has chapters about Mao Zedong, and a chapter about Mussolini, and a chapter about Hitler, and a chapter about other of the great dictators are interesting as studies of power. So I tend not to read autobiographies, which are mostly, of course, works of fiction, but good biographies about powerful figures are interesting, and can teach you a lot about how various leaders have exercised power. The Caro biographies on Lyndon Johnson are amazing, for sure.
Yeah, those are great suggestions. Thank you, Jeff. And if you are enjoying this conversation, please hit the like button and the share button so that your friends can benefit from it as well. We want to say hi to some of our great friends tuning in from around the world. Ravi is joining us from Bangalore. We have Roberta in Boston, Adnan from Turkey. Robin is in Baltimore and Florida, possibly at the same time, possibly bending the laws of physics. We want to hear more, Robin. Alessandra is from Brazil. Anna's in New Hampshire. Danielle's in Dublin. Patricia is in Stockton, California. Tracy is in Hollywood, Maryland. We have Sohail from Lake Ermia. We have Azadeh from Arizona. We have Anna from St. Albert, Canada. We have Abu Bakar from Nigeria, and Eric is in New York. We love having every single one of you. And a great question came in from Ravi in Bangalore. He wants to know, Jeff, does Gen Z look at power differently and have different expectations? What do you think of this sort of generational questions?
What a great question. So I think the young generation has a different view of power. Unfortunately, their view of power and the reality of power are oftentimes at variance. So I will tell people, both in my online class and certainly in my on-campus class, and even in the book, 7 Rules of Power, I tell them that they're going to go through stages of learning about power. And the first stage is going to be denial. Denial is going to be, the new generation looks at power differently. Or, it doesn't work in small startups, or, it doesn't work in Southeast Asia where people are more communal, or it doesn't work, I don't know, here or there. And those are all forms of denial. It's a way of saying power and the rules of power don't apply in my particular situation, which we'll get back to in a second. And then after denial, of course, comes anger. How can this man teach this material? This is like, this man, I once had a review on Amazon for my last book in which somebody said, you need to read this book because this man is the devil. And if you're going to fight the devil, you actually need to know who the devil is. So I thought that was kind of a compliment. One of my favorite songs is the Rolling Stones' Sympathy for the Devil. So anyway, anger is often then followed by sadness, where people say, okay, this is how the world works. It is the case that Imelda Marcos was able to elect her son, Ferdinand Marcos Jr., even though the Marcoses are accused widely of looting the Philippines and, they were chased out of the country. It is the case that, strong men are on the rise in Hungary and Poland, and obviously in the Soviet, obviously in Russia, and Xi has made himself president for life in China. Isn't this sad? Isn't it sad that we have, isn't it sad maybe that there's a possibility that Donald Trump will get reelected in 2024? Isn't it sad? Isn't it sad that there's not more concern for ethics and morals and values and taking care of people and all these other things? And if we are successful, and that's why I use a lot of executive coaches with both the online and on-campus class, because I do believe in coaching. If we are successful, people by the end of the class, and many of them do, reaches what I would call a stage of acceptance. And acceptance is, this is the way the world is. I don't have to accept it, but if I'm going to change it, I need to do that from a position of leverage. And so therefore, I need to figure out how to use the rules of power. I need to figure out how to use these social science principles in ways to accomplish what I want to accomplish. Power is a tool. It can be used for good. It can be used for evil. It can be used for everything in between. And how you use it is kind of up to you, but mastering the tools are important.
Wonderful. We're here with Jeffrey Pfeffer. If you want to learn more about his work, just go to jeffreypfeffer.com. His new book is called The 7 Rules of Power. And we're talking about how you can become more powerful at work so you can get done the things you need to do. And we want to say hi to our great friends tuning in. We've got Devang from Gujarat. We've got Barbara in Johannesburg. Zeke is in San Benito, Texas. Renee is in Costa Rica. Cynthia's in LA. Marian from Ohio. Paula from Brazil. Jeff's in Missouri. Natasha from Argentina. Angela's in Dublin. Ricardo is in Germany, and he wants us to know he's not German. He's Portuguese. So, hey, Ricardo. JP's in Colombia. Diana's in Switzerland. Eva's in Poland. Mylene is in Boston. And we love having every single one of you. And a great question, Jeff, came in from Alicia. She's in Oakland. And she wants to know, can you talk about the role of humility and spirituality in power? How do these factors tie in?
Well, humility is interesting. There is this thing, Jim Collins wrote about level 5 leaders who, of course, are humble, even though they're fiercely determined. And there is this idea of humbleness. The problem is that the research evidence is pretty clear that narcissism, which I would argue is pretty much the opposite of humility, is consistently related to getting hired, getting promoted, achieving high-level leadership positions. So I think humility is overrated. I quote in Power, the last book, this quote that was given to me or put me onto by Robert Cialdini, the author of the book Influence. Golda Meir, the late Israeli prime minister, has this fabulously insightful quote. And the more you think about it, the more brilliant it sounds. Her quote is, "Don't be so humble, you're not that good." If you think about that, once you're a Nobel Prize winner, the humility is wonderful. Wow, here's this person won like Nobel Prize. I had privilege when I worked at the University of Illinois to know John Bardeen, who had won the Nobel Prize twice. He was a very humble person. Wow. The point being that, oftentimes I think we are excessively humble and excessively self-deprecating, and that does not do well for building our power. So humility is not a trait that I advocate, and I particularly don't advocate that trait for people who are assumed to not be powerful. So, should women who are assumed already to not necessarily be in an advantaged position, should they be humble and they're expected to be humble? Probably not. They need to be probably a little more forceful and stand up for themselves and negotiate for themselves. So humility, I think, is that's one. That's the answer to that question. With respect to spirituality, I think spirituality is between you and your significant other and your family and how you want to live your life. But with respect to power, I mean, you can see all kinds of power, powerful people. And spirituality is oftentimes tricky. People have used spirituality. I mean, in the words of my late wife, more people have been killed in the name of God than probably in the name of every other thing. I mean, we did the Crusades and the 100 Years War and the religious wars and all the stuff that's going on now. So I would be a little careful about spirituality and particularly trying to impose your view of spirituality on other people.
Yeah, excellent points. Thank you. We're here with Jeffrey Pfeffer. He's the author of the new book, The 7 Rules of Power. And if you want to make sure you never miss one of our weekly Newsweek interview shows, it's every Thursday at noon Eastern, 9 Pacific, 5 o'clock in London. Just go to dorieclark.com. You can sign up, get a free self-assessment, and you'll get reminders about this show so you never miss anything. And Jeff, a question that I have for you, I'm curious. You mentioned in the 7 Rules of Power, rule number 3 is show up in a powerful fashion, which makes sense to me. That sounds like a good plan. How do we actually operationalize it? What does it mean to show up in a powerful fashion?
Well, I should turn the question back on you. I have known you for a number of years. And as I look at you over those years, I believe you have done an extraordinarily exceptional job over that time in showing up in a more powerful fashion. That I suspect that if we were to do a video clip of Dorie Clark in 2022, and Dorie Clark, when I first met you, and I don't even know how long ago that was, but let's call it a decade or maybe 15 years, that if we put the 2 video clips side by side, not only would I see a difference, not only would your audience see a difference, but you would see a difference. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. Yeah, absolutely.
Of course.
So what do you think I did?
I think, I think acting and speaking with power are skills that are mastered with practice. So, it's not a surprise to me that you've gotten better at this over time because practice makes you better. I think it is speaking in a forceful fashion, not using filler words. I think it is building, having wonderful eye contact with the audience. I think it is using forceful gestures. It is sitting up straight. It is, it is taking command of the room. If you are in person, which I've seen you in also, to be expansive, to walk, to basically engage with people, to get in their face, so to speak, but in a nice way. I mean, all of these things. I mean, my colleague Dana Carney has written an article on, it's written actually in several articles on body language and how to use powerful body language. And I would urge people to read those articles. And these are all skills that can be learned. And I think we get better at these over time.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. And thank you for the kind words, Jeff. I appreciate it. We also want to take a moment to say hi to our great friends tuning in and joining us from around the world. Again, if you like this conversation with Jeffrey Pfeffer, hit the like and share button so that your friends can all benefit from it as well. Simon's here from Austria. Robert is in Berlin. Lucas is in Brazil. Sushma's tuning in from India. Zulima in Mexico. Annetta from St. Louis Metro East, Illinois. Good caveat there, Annetta. Thank you. We don't want to misrepresent. Servan is in Turkey. Vani's in the south of France. Rita Marie is tuning in this week from Ireland. Laura's in London. Tushar is in Delhi. And Susan is in a train right now going to Zurich. We love having all of you. Thank you. Jeff, a great question came in. and that I wanted to point to here, if I can find it in all of the amazing comments streaming in. And here we go. A LinkedIn user wants to know, this is a topic I know that your colleagues Jennifer Acker and Naomi Bagdonis have written about. What is your take on humor in the context of power? How do you feel like these areas tie in?
So there's a wonderful quote from the author who was unfortunately recently attacked, Salman Rushdie, who has this wonderful quote that says, if you can get people to laugh, you can tell them anything. And so I think humor is a wonderful way of disarming people and making serious things light. The example that I often use in my class is I show people clips of Oliver North. Many people, I'm sure, listening don't remember Oliver North, the man who in the Reagan administration ran foreign policy from the basement of the White House and did some amazing things, including, of course, shred documents. So he's called in front of Congress to talk about his shredding of documents and basically trying to cover up and running foreign policy for Ronald Reagan out of the basement of the White House. And he shows up and he basically makes a joke out of shredding. So they say, well, didn't you shred documents? And he looks at the questioner and says, of course, that's why the government gave me a shredder. Of course I shred documents, so he never denies. Yes, of course I shred documents. That's why the government gave me a shredder. So, he basically he kind of makes light out of what he's done as opposed to, taking it very serious. And of course, humor is extraordinarily disarming. So I'm a big advocate of using humor.
Yes, absolutely. Humor can make a huge difference. So thank you for sharing that. So a kind of interesting question also comes up, Jeff, from Sushma in India. And she's curious, can you talk about the role of character while using power? Because the consequences, as you were saying earlier, depend on who's using it. We can use it for good, we can use it for ill. How do we think about character as part of all of this?
Well, So I think about it in two ways. Number one, the evidence suggests that your character is formed relatively early in your life by your family, by your friends, by the particular religious tradition in which you were raised. And the evidence also suggests that giving you classes or training in ethics does essentially nothing in terms of affecting ethical behavior. And so therefore, when people come to me, I think this depends upon the age in which we're talking about this. So, when people come to me for good or for ill, they are in their mid-20s in the full-time program, in their mid-30s or even 40s in the online lead program. And so their character is formed. I do not believe at this stage in their life as fully formed adults, I'm going to have very much influence on their character or on their values or anything else. And so my job is really to do what I know how to do, which is to teach them the social science. But the character development, I don't think is kind of within my purview, given their age at which they arrive in these classes.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of intuitive sense. We want to say hi to our great friends tuning in from around the world. We probably have time for one more question, but first we want to greet Ekta from Toronto. Jahanara is from Banbury, UK. Filani's in South Africa. Clara is in Paraguay. Sarah's in Oklahoma City. And Nikian Yesua, hello in Nigeria. We're so glad you're here. Salam is here from UAE, Omer from Turkey, and Agnitia from Poland, and Michael just landed in Madrid. We love having every single one of you. We're here every week, Thursdays at noon, 9 Pacific, 5 London. Jeff, my final question for you. Would you say there is a most common mistake that people make with regard to power? What's the low-hanging fruit here? What's the thing that a lot of our viewers may inadvertently be doing wrong when it comes to power at work?
What a great question. So I did try to order the 7 rules of power in some logical order. And it is not by accident that rule 1 is get out of your own way. And because I believe, and I suspect you would agree with this, but I want to hear your perspective as well, that in your own work and your consulting and your coaching, that the number one problem is people getting in their own way. being overly concerned about being liked or popular, conforming to gender role or other form of social expectations. Because, I have people say to me, I can't do this because I'm a woman, or I can't do this because I'm an underrepresented minority, or I can't do this because my parents raised me and told me not to be ambitious, that this was not part of who my cultural value is. And so I think the number one issue for people is, in fact, rule one: to get out of your own way, to own your ambition, to own your identity, to own who you are, and to not be embarrassed about it. I have a quote from my friend Laura Esserman, who comes to my class. I wrote a case on her. She's an extraordinarily powerful and famous individual, named by Time magazine as one of the 100 most influential people in the world in 2016. Interesting person, breast cancer oncologist. And her quote begins with, I will not let people tell me what I can and can't do, or say, you're only a woman, or you're only a breast cancer surgeon, so why are you running trials with respect to COVID? Or why are you taking on this issue? Or why are you taking that issue? I will not accept other people's definitions of what I can and cannot do. And I see your head nodding and you smiling. So this must resonate, I think, well with the advice that you give people as well.
I'm right with you, Jeff. It's true. It's extremely hard to be successful and to obtain power if you are ambivalent about whether you want it. So a lot of people do end up consciously, but more often subconsciously, creating problems for themselves in obtaining what they claim their goals are. I think that's exactly right.
Yeah. And it's not just ambivalent about whether or not they want it. It's about letting other people define for them what they are going to be permitted to do to get it. You can't do this because you're a woman, or you can't do this because you don't have an advanced degree, or you can't do this for whatever reason. You're the wrong color or the wrong whatever. I mean, don't let people define you into a box.
Amen to that. We can't let other people dictate the terms of the debate. Thank you so much. We are here with Jeffrey Pfeffer. His book is The 7 Rules of Power. You can learn more about Jeff. You can get his book. You can immerse yourself in his work at jeffreypfeffer.com. Jeff, thank you so much for joining us and being here.
It's been a pleasure being with you. Thank you for inviting me on.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you, everyone. We'll see you next week.